everyone. So most of you are either at Super Bowl parties or you are watching the Super Bowl, but there are a few of us who aren't really into football. So for those of us who are not and you're looking for something quick and healthy to eat, or maybe you are watching the Super Bowl and you want a healthy like halftime thing to throw together, because we all know that like Super Bowl parties are full of food that is not that healthy. So I just wanted to show you something that you can throw together really fast. We all know that even though I've written, now it's 10 books if you include my my journal, and most of those are cookbooks, I don't actually love to cook that much just because I'm so busy. But I do love to make sure that my family is super healthy. So my husband, I was gonna throw together a stew. It's like raining like crazy here in Southern California. I wanted to do a stew and he's like, no, I actually want something really healthy. I want like a sesame, like your kale salad. So I want to show this to you because it's actually really, really easy. So what I do is I take some kale. Now you can, if you really want to make this easy, just buy the kale that's already pre-cut and diced and washed. Then it's really super easy, but I don't. And the reason why is because I like my kale cut really small. I like it more shredded than in big chunks. For salads, I just don't like big chunky kale. It's too hard to eat. So what you can do is you can take a piece of kale. I always was trying to figure out how do they do that, and it must take forever. It actually doesn't. It's so easy. So if you get a piece of kale and you fold both sides of, you take the kale on, because it's got that big stem in the middle, and you just fold it. I already did all mine, or I would show you how to do it. You just fold it all over so that it's like folded in half. And then you've got this big thick stem that's now sort of exposed. Super easy to just cut along that stem. Just be careful not to cut your fingers. Cut along that stem, you'll sort of de-stem it, and then cut crosswise in really thin slices, right? Just stack them and cut crosswise in thin slices, and you'll get this nice thin sort of shredded kale. And so that's how I like to do my kale for the kale salad. Kale salad is always better, in my opinion, either several hours later or even the best the next day. Especially this salad, because it's got a citrus dressing. So the citrus sort of breaks the kale down. So if you have time to let it sit, great. If you don't, then at least your kale is nice and small. So what you're gonna do is take at least one bunch. I like making leftovers. That's one of my big tips for cooking and eating healthy. Make sure that when you cook, you're not cooking for one meal. You're cooking for several meals. So I did 2 bunches of kale. I've got this big gigantic bowl of kale here. So I'm doubling my recipe here. You're gonna see that. So it calls for a bunch of kale. And then this is the other tip that I have. Stop getting hung up on very specific ingredients. I used to be one of those people. I'm an ICU nurse. So if I see a recipe, I'm like, oh, I have to measure every single thing perfectly. And every single ingredient has to be exactly what's in that recipe. Don't worry about that so much. Okay, try, play, do some things. So I had most of this stuff at home. I stopped, grabbed 1 or 2 things. And then I got home and went, oh, okay, well I don't have everything, so I'm just gonna make this work. But one thing I always have, because it calls for chicken, I almost always have leftover chicken, because that's another tip. Like I just said, make sure when you're cooking for more than one meal. So whatever I'm making, I always have leftover chicken, so I can throw something together quickly. So there's chicken here, and then it calls for either, because it's citrus, you can either use grapefruit. If you're gonna do that, I recommend ruby red grapefruit. I just happened to have one because I couldn't find any in the store. I had one left over. Or you can use blood oranges or any kind of sweet orange. So I use my 1 ruby red orange, or you can use 2 oranges, or my ruby red grapefruit, sorry. Or you can use 2 oranges. Now you're supposed to use 1 of the oranges segmented for your salad and then 1 for juice. I only had 1 grapefruit and I want to use the whole thing for my salad, the segments, which means that for my juice, I'm actually going to use the orange, okay, for my dressing. So see, I'm being creative. That's what I mean. Don't get so hung up on it. And that's the first time I've ever done that, but I promise you it's gonna be fine. My husband's gonna love it. Just go with it. And then I'm gonna put a little cilantro in it. Sesame seeds are awesome for it. Okay, so what you're gonna do, I toasted my own sesame seeds. What you wanna do is just take the sesame seeds, throw them in a pan, just until they just start to turn. You don't wanna burn them, and they're gonna get a little bit oily. The oil's gonna come out, so they're gonna get a little sticky. So when you put them in, you're gonna have to really mix them in really well. And then, so you are now you've got your kale, your cilantro, you've got all of your ingredients here, your grapefruit, and I wanted to show you something with the grapefruit. See, because I'm not much of a chef, I'm just not a chef. But I'm a nurse, I like to eat healthy, and I like to feed my family healthy. So finding little shortcuts for me is really important, like the kale thing I just showed you. The grapefruit, I am guessing there's probably a really fancy, like some great way to segment an orange and get the skin off of it. I haven't figured it out, and any chef, please write to me and tell me how to do it. I just cut it in half, but see how thick the skin is? You don't want that skin in your salad. So I cut it in half, and because the skin is like, it's so thick, it's actually easy to do. You just take a knife. What I do is I just take a knife and you kind of separate the skin. It'll separate really easy. You just separate the skin, and then you can just actually just sort of pop it out. And of course I just took my contacts out because they were bothering me. But you can just separate that. I don't want to cut myself. But you can separate that, and it actually just separates really easy. It's like a little pocket. And then I can just like, you can either take your fingers or you can take like a spoon, and it'll just pop right out. And then I just like do that, and I just pop them all out. That's how I do it. There's probably some other easy way. I just wanted to show you that. But if you have a better way, please let me know. That's how I do it. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take my juice ingredients, throw them into, I do it in a blender. You can just hand whisk them. You can do whatever you want. I like to put it on low in my blender. So I've got my juice here, my very overused Vitamix. So I've got my juice from one orange. I actually did a little more because I'm making more in my recipe. About a tablespoon of sesame oil. And then I put just a little tiny bit. It calls for about a tablespoon of honey. I put a little less than that. So because I'm doubling my recipe, I put about a tablespoon of honey this time. Normally I do a little less. Tiny bit of salt. You do that to taste, and if you're on a low sodium diet, skip it all together. A little bit of pepper, usually about a half teaspoon. And that's all that's gonna go into your dressing. So then you're just gonna blend that up. Pardon me while I grab my lid. So I've got my lid. I'm just going to quickly put this on low. And the only reason I do that is because it will actually stay blended that way. You can hand whisk it and it's no big deal, but it stays blended that way. So now I've got my dressing. Now the rest of it's pretty easy. You're just gonna mix your ingredients. I'm gonna toss that. I'm gonna get a bigger bowl than this. I'm gonna toss all of my ingredients together. And when I do that, the one thing I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna toss together my kale, my cilantro with the dressing. I'm gonna put the grapefruit into it, toss that all together, and then I'm gonna mix the chicken in. The one thing I'm gonna do, and the sesame seeds. That's all of it. By the way, this is in Brain Warrior's Way cookbook. You'll also find it on my website, tanaamen.com. The nuts. So it's optional. You can put either pecans or you can put cashews. My family tends to not like pecans as much, even though that's what I originally wrote the recipe to have. So I do cashews. I don't put the cashews in ahead of time. I sprinkle them over the top at the end. The reason why is because I'm making leftovers. So if you put nuts in advance and then you have leftovers, the kale will taste better tomorrow, the cashews will not. So just a little tip. Everything else in here is fine to do in advance. I would do the nuts last and just top it off with that. So that is the simplest recipe. Literally, you should have most of this stuff. What I do is I keep a staple of all of my spices. Just keep a staple of the spices. I always have chicken left over. Just keep a few things on hand. If I have to stop by the store, I just get one or two things. Bam, you can just throw something together super quick. Hope that was helpful. Enjoy the Super Bowl if you're watching it. If not, then feed your family healthy. Enjoy. Bye-bye.